It was Halloween at Blue's house, and when they walked in, an alien arrived, but he was none other than Steve, who was dressed up for the big costume party. Steve went to the bedroom to see Blue and Magenta dressing up in their costumes too. Blue peeked out a little, wearing a mask, and wanted Steve and I to figure out what she was dressed up as. Steve observed Blue's mask that was yellow and orange and curvy and scaly. Blue then showed a tail. Steve and I observed it and saw Blue was a fish. Steve saw Blue was a fish, but when Magenta came out, she was having a hard time deciding what to wear, so we played Blue's Clues to figure it out. Steve saw the paw print dressing up as a storm with a cloud over its head, and a flash of lightning as well. Steve went to get his notebook. He saw side table drawers dressed up as a ghost, spoke in a ghostly voice and said, "I've got your notebook, Steve. I'm being a ghost table. Here's your notebook in my drawer." Steve spoke in a ghostly voice too and said, "Ooh, thank you, ghost table." When Steve took out his notebook, he pretended that it floated like a ghost and floated towards him. After seeing how to play Clues, Steve heard the doorbell ring, so Steve put on his alien costume again and went to the door and opened it. A person went inside and an octopus arrived. Steve felt curious about who the octopus was, so he decided to observe who. Spoke in an voice and said, "Observation commencing," and greeted the octopus. The octopus greeted Steve, who observed the octopus having bubbles and saying, "Whoa," and I said it was none other than Slippery Soap. Steve spoke like an alien again and said, Are you the being they call Slippery Soap?" And Slippery showed himself and slid away to have fun. Steve then told me to keep an eye stalk out for Blue's Clues, and then saw the first clue in the felt frame on some little footprints. Then as Steve opened his notebook, he heard an evil laughter and got a little nervous and drew the prints. Steve didn't know what Magenta could wear with just little prints. Then Steve was called out by Slippery Soap, who Blue and Magenta were playing the monster toss and needed him to be a judge. I was one too. Steve then had to figure out which cauldron had more monster bags. After observing them, I saw that one on the right had more. To test the idea, Blue and Magenta dumped the cauldrons over, and the monster bags fell out. Steve counted 4 in cauldron number 1 and 6 in cauldron number 2, which had more, and 6 is more than 4. After cleaning up the monster bags and putting them back in the cauldrons, another monster bag came out of nowhere, and it had the second clue on whiskers. Steve took out his notebook, and the evil laughter kind made him a little more nervous and still drew the whiskers. So far, the clues were little prints and whiskers, but Steve still didn't know what Magenta should wear with just little prints and whiskers. And Steve and Blue heard another guest coming, and when they saw who it was Boo the ghost in the picture frame of his haunted house. Steve then greeted Boo, who got scared. Steve and Blue got scared too. Steve knew that Boo was very sensitive and that every time Boo's name was mentioned, he gets spooked. Steve greeted Boo, who got spooked again, but greeted Steve and Blue back and showed he was a bag of leaves. Steve was amazed and intrigued by the costume. Boo then told Steve he wanted to tell a story to him and Blue, so they skidooed in. Once inside, Boo told Steve that Blue that a long time ago, in a night like tonight, there was a monster called an Oogla Boogla that lived in Boo's house that wanted to find her, and every time Oogla Boogla's name was mentioned, it echoed. Steve and Blue were a little nervous, but deep down, they felt excited and pleased to help Boo. Steve and Blue were puzzled about who this Oogla Boogla was. Blue explained that Oogla Boogla was a monster that left directions for whoever wanted to find her, spotted one in a flower pot. Steve read the directions and said, if Oogla Boogla you want to find, turn around and walk behind. With that, Steve, Blue, and Boo went inside Boo's haunted house. Steve read more of the directions and said, within this hall is your chore to open up the tallest door. And Steve then observed all 4 doors and went in front of them to measure, and the first one went up to Steve's head. The second one went up to his eyes, the third one went up to Steve's mouth, and the fourth one went up to his forehead. I saw the first door was the tallest. Suddenly, the door opened by itself and another direction came, and Steve read, go through this door. You won't be bored. Oogla Boogla will be the reward. So they went inside. But Steve, Boo, and Blue went inside were two staircases, and Steve read the rest of the directions and said, "If Oogla Boogla you're trying to find, the staircase with more steps you need to climb." They observed them and counted 8 steps in the staircase on the right and 11 on the staircase on the left, and tried one on the left was picked because 11 is more than 8. Steve, Blue, and Boo walked happily but nervously and cautiously upstairs, and another pair of directions came out from behind a curtain, and Steve read, "Once you go behind the curtain, Oogla Boogla is nearby for certain." Walked behind the curtain, and Steve read the rest of the directions and said, "Look high, look low. The room with the smallest number of black tiles is where you should go." The doors opened and saw some black tiles and rugs, so they observed again, and Boo removed the rug from the first room, and Steve counted 9 black tiles, and Boo removed the rug from the second room, and Steve counted 7 black tiles, and I saw the room on the right had the small number of black tiles, and 7 is less than 9. So Boo put the rug back in the first room, and the door closed, and the rug back in the second room, and the door inside opened, and then they went inside. Just then, Steve, Blue, and Boo heard a singing voice and saw a shadow of the Oogla Boogla singing and dancing and chanting, and her name as well. Steve, Blue, and Boo, and even I, were more nervous and scared than ever, but they had to be brave. So they walked in and floated slowly over and saw a little purple monster, and it was none other than Oogla Boogla, who was revealed to have sent Boo to get Steve and Blue, and they weren't scared one bit, and they laughed and snickered a little bit. Oogla Boogla, who laughed with them, showed that she made Oogla Boogla treats for Boo's costume party. Steve and Blue felt happy and became Oogla Boogla's new friend. They chanted the name with her. Suddenly, Steve stepped on a loose floorboard, and it showed the third clue on a squeak sound. Steve took out his notebook and heard the evil laughter once again, and drew the squeak sound. Steve and Blue scooted back to the thinking chair and heard the same evil laughter one last time, and observed the clues one at a time. The first clue was Little Prince, and lots of animals make footprints, and figured Magenta could be a rhinoceros. The second clue was whiskers, but rhinos don't have whiskers. Steve figured Magenta could be a cat since they have whiskers. The third clue was a squeak sound, but cats don't squeak, they meow. Steve realized that a mouse was the answer to Blue's clues. After figuring out Blue's clues, Steve and Blue suggested a mouse costume to Magenta, who agreed. Then, when it was mail time, Steve told Blue and Magenta to have their costumes repaired. Steve and I get the mail, and they will play the costume limbo afterwards. Mailbox arrived and said that their costume limbo was his second favorite party game other than musical chairs, and pinned the flag on Mailbox. Then, when it was time for costume limbo, Steve wore his alien costume again, and Slippery and Boo arrived still dressed as an octopus in a bag of leaves. Slippery slid, slipped, skidded, and whoa under the limbo stick. And Boo wrestled and floated under the limbo and stick. Then Steve heard Blue and Magenta dressed as a fish and mouse and swam and scattered under the limbo stick, and Steve sung the so long song.